Alex Duncan. A
Hi,
very
Pete.
a very warm welcome to Plantae Convivi's In Convivium interview series. How are you today?
I'm very good. Bit busy, but I'm glad to be here.
Good, 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 good. Now, you're known these days as the composer in the woods because you create pioneering music with plants and fungal mycelia. And according to your website, you see it as your calling now to give plant life a voice in a world in desperate need of their wisdom, which I'd like to add a significant and loud amen to. When did this chapter of your creative life begin, and um, how did the idea arise for you to work with plants and fungi?
Well, I suppose about 8 or 9 years ago, must have been when it all began. I just released an album called Earth Suite, which was based on 5 pieces of work that were about 36 minutes long, and they were based on they circumnavigated the globe. So there was a Tropic of Capricorn and a Tropic of Cancer and an equator and so on. And these pieces of music would start at one geographical point, and then following the lines around the equator or wherever it was, so at minute 4 you'd have moved 4 degrees and so on until you'd come all the way back around again. And the idea of the exercise was to kind of highlight climate change and different parts of the environment and places like drowning, all kinds of different things. And I had really good critical reception. I had a good review, lots of good reviews in Electronic Sound Magazine and things like that. And everybody was saying what a great piece of work it was. And I thought it was rubbish. And I thought that I was dead as an artist and I was completely pointless. And I may as well, stop trying to be creative and just go and do something else. I was really miserable, really miserable. And it was back in the days when Twitter was quite a safe and fluffy place, relatively speaking. And one of my, cause I had lots of followers, and one of my followers said that they were just releasing a device called a MIDI sprout. Now, a MIDI sprout as it was an amazing invention. The guy who invented it basically wanted to get artists to start to connect to nature in a new and exciting way. So he would he got this electrical device that you could plug it into anything that's alive, and then it would give you MIDI data, which is, in other words, it would mean that you could get a plant or a rotten apple to move the notes on a synthesizer. Now, as an artist, that could be a really exciting thing, because instead of a human choosing the notes, you get a plant or a piece of fungus to choose the notes. So obviously, from an artistic point of view, that opens up a whole new concept, a whole new idea, because you're no longer just a human choosing, to play E minor or whatever it happens to be.
Mm-hmm. Um, the technical side is probably quite technical, so I guess we can skip over that today.
Yeah, I mean, if people really are interested, go to Plantwave or SPAD Electronics website and learn how the biodata is collected. But it's only because, from an artistic, because I obviously get asked that question all the time. But from an artistic point of view, it's just that I don't really care, because I've been using it for like 8 or 9 years, so I know how it works and I know what it does, and I've watched exciting things happen in a piece of woodland, or whether, or in the studio. So I'm completely committed to the technology, and I just want to get on with making pieces of artwork because I know I can do that. I don't want to be somebody that just gets kind of swept into just talking about the technology and how it works and how amazing it is, because I that's not my skill.
No, no, absolutely. So, okay, in terms of the creative process, once you have the data, then can you kind of sketch out how it works, whether you're working solo or whether you're working with our mutual friend, for example, Annie, in your um, myco-vegetal group, Lichon.
That's beautiful. I like that. Okay, cool. Yes, no, I definitely can do that. So, what I would do on an average day is I might go into a piece of woodland and I'll get my MIDI sprouter, whichever device I'm using, and I'll connect it to perhaps to a leaf, and then I'll connect to the other end, perhaps to the mycorrhizal network in on the forest floor, and then this will start to give me electrical patterns, and they may be electrical patterns that show that the tree is just photosynthesizing and moving carbon around in the network, or it might be an electrical pattern that shows me that the tree is under some sort of state of distress. So, for example, I was sat in a piece of woodland near Heartland collecting data from a giant pine tree, absolutely massive, definitely the queen of all she surveyed, and it was doing its usual photosynthesizing kind of notes, just kind of popping around in a gentle way, and then it started doing a response that I now recognize as a stress response, where the notes go along quite low and then they eventually ascend chromatically until they're really, really high, and then they drop back down again. So you get these little MIDI patterns that kind of go up, drop, go up, drop, and then eventually, when the stress kind of disappears, they slowly then go back to a kind of more steady pattern. But this tree started doing stress responses, and I was kind of like, well, that's very strange. I'm sat beside a tree. What could be possibly going on? And about 10 minutes after this started to happen, a hill climb went through. And of course, that makes sense because a hill climb is full of really big engines. So lots of vibration, lots of disturbance. So the tree or the network probably felt the vibrations, well, 10 minutes before I did, because it's all connected.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's amazing. And I know you have another story as well regarding an oak tree that an acquaintance or friend of yours is closely related with. That kind of, for anyone who's kind of thinking, well, it's just, electronic signals and data. It has limited meaning, really. But you've got a great story that kind of takes it a little bit deeper, don't you?
I do, yes. There's a friend of mine called Mason who runs wellness retreats in Essex, and he'd asked me to go and do a talk and do some music there. So I went off to Essex to do the talk, and he had a tree that he introduced to me called Sherman, and he has a really good relationship with Sherman, and he goes to talk to it every day, and he gives it bone meal, and he just generally sits and has a chat with Sherman every day. And while I was there, he asked me if I could record the data while he went and had his daily kind of meditation with Sherman. So I said, yes, of course I would. That would be absolutely fine. So I connected up all my technology, and I was recording on the laptop. And this MIDI file was doing what you would usually expect. So you had kind of just notes kind of popping up and down, but quite a busy sort of photosynthesizing tree kind of pattern. And the moment he took his shoes off, it stopped doing that and went down to just two or three notes and turned into something more like what you would recognize as a drone. And then while he was meditating for perhaps 10 minutes, it just stayed on this one continuous pattern. And then when he'd finished and he put his shoes back on, it went back to its own behavior. So the reason why I think that's amazing is because it noticed that he was there. I don't know what the response was to it, but it was either waiting for him to drop some nutrients, or it was just accepting the electricity that he was giving through the soil. But it was responding to him. That was what was really interesting.
Well, what I mean, I guess many of the people who are listening to this video will be aware of the quite significant electromagnetic fields that the human body generates. I mean, we're bioelectric beings on a bioelectric planet, like everything else. So, you would imagine that someone who's meditating, for example, that will be a little bit more radiant, let's say, a little bit more powerful. So, it's not unimaginable to think that the tree is recognizing that presence within its own field, which will be similarly kind of double toroidal, and encompassing him if he's underneath it. You see, if you see,
Absolutely.
yeah,
You
yeah, yeah.
find when you're doing music with them that eventually after perhaps a little bit longer, probably more like 20 minutes or something, if we're doing a live performance as Lichon, and we've got Anissa playing the viola, and a guy called George comes and plays drums with us sometimes, and then I kind of add MIDI data and more guitar playing. When we do that, after about 20 minutes or so, you'll find that the MIDI data that's being generated live starts to become much more relevant to what we were doing when we were rehearsing. We got some rehearsals again quite soon, but I think the last time we were rehearsing was probably the end of last year, and we were rehearsing together. We'd just gone through this kind of like wild, complete lunatic sort of moment, and we were all just having like our best life, and we stopped, and then the MIDI data that was coming from these plants that were in the room were kind of they were echoing and embellishing what we'd just done, but we'd all stopped. So it was kind of like doing this beautiful little sort of like musical interlude, and it was completely irrelevant to what we'd just done. And it felt like we were in the presence of a being that was enjoying what we were doing and really wanted to contribute. And it was crazy. It was cool.
Yeah, that's wonderful. I mean, they're, it's still, I mean, I think people have been playing with these kind of ideas for some decades now. I think the eco village Damanhur in Italy, I think is it, or somewhere around there in southern Europe, are famous for their plant music. But it's still a really new field, isn't it? And I think, I mean, how do you see the field growing from here? Both in terms of generally, but also, your own work, and threads you want to weave on.
Goodness, that's such a good question. I guess from my own point of view as an artist, I can only really be true to what I do. So when I get artistic ideas, which are aplenty at the moment, and we work together, we're creating an album, we do live, we get touring and all that kind of stuff. So from an artistic point of view, I will try and make artwork that engages people and makes me feel interested and happy. I think, I mean, like all of these things, it just takes a really long time, so much longer than you'd ever think. I mean, it's like, I don't know, something completely not on subject, but a good example of that is if you take the fact that women were given the vote 100 years ago, and we still haven't reached a point where you would consider that to have been done and dusted and all sorted out. Whereas when I was 15 years old or something, I would make the massive assumption that that was something that we didn't need to worry about anymore. It was going in the right direction, equal rights for everybody. We were sorted. But that's just not how the universe is. So if this is going to be similar, if this is going to follow the same kind of patterns, it might not be considered to be something normal in and for another 100 years.
Mm. Yeah,
Because
no, no,
and that
yeah,
might be good, it might be good that we take a long time as a species to get to the right place. I don't know, but I mean, I'm just doing the best I can and hoping that people listen are interested.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. It may take a long time, although, it seems to be kind of cracking on at a fair pace these days. The kind of blossoming research on plant intelligence and sentience, but not just plants, fungal intelligence, the intelligence of water, Gaian intelligence and sentience, and
I,
so on.
I, I think I think fungal intelligence is probably I, I I think it's probably a greater being, I should imagine. I
Yeah,
mean, if
yeah.
you look,
Well,
if you look at Chernobyl, which is a good example of human stupidity on an industrial scale, literally on an industrial scale, having black molds growing around that and taking that nuclear waste and turning it back into non-dangerous atoms and compounds. That's amazing. There isn't a human on the planet that can do that, and they've done that in 40 years. That's actually wild.
yeah,
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
I mean, my own silly Alex concept. This is how much using biodata to start to work on from an artistic point of view has changed my view of the universe. I really do honestly think that humans are simply here for light entertainment. And let me kind of like let me kind of go a little bit further with that before anybody just thinks that I'm completely insane. If you are building environments and planets, which I mean, if I was capable of doing that, if I could be an omnipresent super being and I was a collection of fungus and I was building planets because it was a fun thing to do. I mean, it would be a beautiful thing to do. Sooner or later, after a few million years, I'm going to be bored. I'm going to need problems to solve because I've cracked it. I can do spores up above the forest to create rain. It's all running beautifully. It's an amazing planet. Aren't I clever? This is really good. You want something that's going to just be a total nightmare because it will give you problems to solve. Because if you look at plastic, for example, plastic when it was manifest through our behavior. When was that? What, 50 years ago, something? I don't know, whenever it was. um but now fungi are taking those little microplastics, and they're working on them. Every time we create a problem, no matter how enormous it is, sooner or later they rock up and sort it out.
Mhm. Yeah, it's incredible. And I think, we can trace it back to really to kind of Gaian and even deeper than that intelligence, really, because they're all
Sure.
sub expressions of.
Yes,
Um,
yes.
so with all this, the growing awareness and rediscovery from an indigenous culture point of view of the wider sentience all about us, um, and the inevitable discussions around rights for various aspects of wider nature and ethics, has as you've kind of gotten deeper into this, has the ethical side kind of come more to the forefront of your thinking and
You
doing
mean you
in
mean
terms
you,
of.
you mean do I think that we should be giving, or giving's not the right word, is it? Because it's not really our right to take or give. But do you think as a species we should be recognizing that our local river or our local forest has a right to exist just as much as anything else? I think the answer to that is yes.
Oh, no, no, no. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we'd all be on the same page there, I think. But in terms of your work, for example, um, in the beginning, were you just like
Ah, okay, okay,
clipping onto
okay,
leaves,
yes.
and now are you going, is it okay if I just clip
Yes.
my, you
That's
know,
exactly what to do. So people think, oh, well, obviously, I mean, when I did RHS Chelsea last week, or no, the week before last, and I would be going, oh, sorry, I'm just gonna, I'd be having a conversation with whatever I was testing, putting my clips on. And these days, what I tend to do, because I feel slightly uncomfortable when I put, because the first ones I had these kind of like crocodile clips on them, and you clip them on everything, and you just like destroy it, basically testing it. Um, and now that makes me feel really uncomfortable because I know what results I'm going to get if I do that. So I have a tendency to kind of get these kind of like clinical pins that are really thin and small, and I probably won't even put them through a leaf unless there's a really good reason, because I'm trying to display something. But what I find myself doing more and more is I'll put these pins into the ground, into the mycorrhizal network, because um, I feel more respectful by doing that. Whereas, of course, when I first started, I was setting fire to them, and I was putting vodka on them and things to see what happened. And then and oh, look, if I tear a leaf off, I bet nothing. Oh dear, it is changing. This is a
you
bit weird.
beast, you beast.
Exactly. But
Mm,
does that mean that I don't mow the lawn? No, it doesn't. I still do mow my piece of lawn sometimes, but it means that when I go and do that, or when I eat a banana, um, I feel very grateful for being able to do that because it's amazing.
mm. Now, I've seen you perform live just the once, I'm sure, and hope there'll be another occasion before too long. And you and Annie at that point were working with plants in pots. And I know since then, certainly, you've been out on the land. So you've kind of gone from ex situ to in situ um, data gathering. Have you noticed a significant difference in the two?
I don't know whether it's my imagination or whether it's my artistic excitement, but when you do these things in situ, so it's all connected up properly rather than in a cage, which is effectively what a plant pot is,
Mm.
um, things definitely get more exciting for 100%. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Like that story I told you about the tree. I couldn't have experienced something as mind-blowing as that because I wouldn't have been connected up to a network that was probably miles wide.
Yeah, I know Stephen Harron Buhner, who I regularly mention, late great mentor of mine, who sadly I never got a chance to meet. He wrote a lot about the how extensive those neural nets, as he called them, were, not just for an individual plant, but then most plants are then connected into the mycorrhizal networks, and there's a lot of overlap there. and the neural structures kind of extend out, the Gaian mind extend out uh, vastly, and to a greater extent than our what we have inside our skulls, and
Yeah.
it makes you, yeah, move into awe a little bit more readily. Um, you mentioned featuring, starring at the Chelsea Flower Show, which is the flagship event for the Britain's Royal Horticultural Society, the RHS. Um, Horticulture still in many ways in this country is very conventional, although the RHS have been, making great strides in many ways over the last probably 20 years in terms of sustainability. But how did you find um, the Chelsea Flower Show? I've only ever been there once, and this was
Okay,
1987.
okay, right. So
1987. This was a long time ago because it's quite an intense thing. So A, how did you find it? And B, how were you received? And finally, three-parter, um, was it obvious that there's a shift in how they are doing horticulture these days?
right. So the first part of the question is that the artists and the other people doing the other pieces of work and everybody that worked there were amazing and beautiful and extremely kind. So, there were people sharing plants, there were people helping people that were struggling to get their thing finished on time. Everybody was working together, and it was nothing like if you go to some sort of competition, like I don't know, like a five-a-side football competition, or you go to, or even when you're having loads of bands doing a festival or something, there's a certain bit of a kind of like, well, are they going on before us? Are they better than us? That kind of thing going on. But these people were not like that at all. It was beautiful. It was mind-blowing, actually. They were just so glorious, and it was so that's the kind of the start of the conversation. And then the next part of the conversation is you're running the thing, you're doing the talk, and people who come from, dare I say, an urban and more urbanized environment. So perhaps it's more difficult for them to spend as much time as I am so privileged to do in massive bits of awe-inspiring nature. They were really, really excited and moved by it. And this sounds ridiculous, but it's true. So I did have people that were putting on their headphones and starting to cry. It's because they were just, how can this possibly be a thing? This is insane. This is amazing. So you've got that really extreme emotion. Then you've got people who uh, don't want to know. So there were people that maybe you could call traditional, the sort of people that you would expect to see at an event. Oh, that's not fair, is it? But people that would definitely be traditional, they would like their lawns to be very, very tidy. They would like everything to be clipped. They would like their apple trees to be trained tightly to a wall, and they would like their conifers to be beautiful cylindrical balls. So they like the control over nature, which is fine. Everybody's different. That's all cool. But I think I may have offended a few people from that particular point of there was definitely a bit of like no.
Mm,
So,
mm,
but it was extreme reaction. Like I said, I mean, the good thing was I don't think we spoke to anybody that just thought it was boring and not interesting.
mm, mm,
And I think sometimes when you're doing things correctly, you're either really upsetting somebody or you're really exciting somebody.
mm.
I mean, I don't know. A great artist like David Lynch certainly generated a lot of anger and a lot of love, but he was definitely doing something interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's great that the RHS, if you like, are prepared to take the risk on bringing these
Yeah,
kinds of
amazing.
initiatives,
Amazing.
and weed gardens or wildflower gardens and things like that in recent years. Good for them to kind of try it
Yeah,
out.
absolutely. It's
Mm,
a big deal. The people that instigated and were brave enough to get people, because I wasn't the only person there doing Helena Anahita Wilson, who I know really well. She was doing something similar on another one on the other side of the site. So they are, there are people in the RHS that are just really brave and really good and really kind and really trying to add a new conversation to what they're trying to say as an organization. And I think that they're amazing people.
Mm. Did you get an invite to go back next year? I mean, I know it's very hard to get in to the show, isn't it? How did you get
Yeah.
in? I mean, presumably you were part of
Well,
a.
it's a bizarre story. It's quite a bizarre story. So my wife went to Strawberry Hill House last autumn to see an amazing exhibition. Um, and Dimitri, who was the artist, well, hang on, no. So she went to this amazing exhibition at Strawberry Hill House. Then she was in her gallery in Heartland, and this guy called James came in and said, "Oh, I love your work. This is really amazing." They started talking, and she said, "Oh, I've just been to this exhibition in London, actually, at the Strawberry Hill House. It was beautiful." He said, "That was my boyfriend who did that exhibition, Dimitri." And she said, "Oh, it's beautiful." And then they started talking, and she said, and Lydia said, "Well, you should talk to my husband because he's really interested in what you're trying to say." From an artistic point of view. So James went back to his partner and said, "Oh, you ought to follow this guy on Instagram." So they followed me on Instagram, and then uh, about 6 weeks later, probably about Christmas, they sent me an email saying, "We are on the same page, even though you're a sound guy and we are florists and artists." He did this wonderful sculpture. I think you should come on board with our Chelsea Flower Show application. So I was like, "Wow, okay, cool." So it
Well,
was a
you may have
little
swung
kind of
it
like
for them. You may have swung it for them. Well, no, no, it's great. It's wonderful that it was uh, a great success, and
I
it
think
was.
it was really successful. Tim Smith was really nice.
Oh, okay. Well, he's a bit of a legend in his own
Yeah,
way.
he's certainly a heavyweight. He's the sort of person. I mean, and I did meet quite a few people like that. If I can get people like that to think this is really cool and really interesting, because they are the kings of getting more people to pay attention. If you can get people like that on board,
Oh, totally, totally.
even
I
if
mean,
they just think, well, I could probably make a few quid out of this. Well, I don't really care. If I can be able, if I can be put in a position where I can have this conversation with more and more people, even if half of them think that I'm a complete lunatic. That's still half the universe that are going back to their own woodlands and their own gardens, and perhaps feeling a little bit different when they put a hand on a tree.
no, totally. And for those who don't know Tim Smith, Sir Tim Smith these days, I think he's the main guy behind the I guess world famous Eden project in Cornwall, which is now at last seeding itself elsewhere around the British Isles and the world as well. So yeah, and he's all about, communicating sustainability and storytelling around plants and everything
He
else as
was
well.
really nice
Mm,
and really interested, and
mm,
sent
mm,
us a very nice email afterwards. Whether that means it probably doesn't mean anything, but you still, those are the people that you've got to convince.
mm,
This is a conversation worth having
mm.
for sure.
What has most surprised you about working with the more than human?
How it's changed my whole psychological profile. I think it's given me a sense of connection with nature. I think, you know, it just it's a bit like um when people talk about doing like vast amounts of DMT or acid or whatever psychedelic they wish they want to choose, and during that moment they feel much more connected to the universe. Well, it's made me do that without any kind of like chemical intervention. I feel completely in awe, completely happy about it. Perhaps I mean this whole album that we're doing at the moment, which is called The Weathering, is all about how our from our concept all the way to our death is, we are just following the same patterns that a tree or anything else follows. And if we learn to follow those patterns, like if you look at a mighty oak, you think it's magnificent, don't you? But we have a tendency to, when we look at ourselves and we're no longer 24, we kind of we kind of think that we're deteriorating, like we're failing. Like, so, I mean, can you imagine taking a mighty oak tree and trying to make it look like a little sapling that's like 4 years old? That would be, apart from that, it would be impossible. You completely ruin that beautiful, magnificent plant that was growing, and we have a tendency to do that with ourselves, don't we? We try and look at being 24 as being perfect, but I think if we can look at plants and look at the environment and turn that back on ourselves and think about, because we're going to be dead longer than we do anything else. That's guaranteed. I'm going to be dead much longer than I do anything else. So if I think about what I want to leave behind when I'm dead, rather than how big my sofa is, or how many cars I own, or how many people I want to sleep with, if I try and think about how my shadow, because my shadow will be long, even if I'm just an irrelevant guy from nowhere, I still will affect my children and my friends and my friends' friends for quite a long period of time. So I think thinking about going back into the soil is quite a healthy mindset, because we all came from the soil. So, and if all things follow the natural progress of what happens, that's where I'll be again. So I'm trying to kind of like think in perhaps a slightly different way.
You're making me think you're going to organize a project post-death.
Well, the album does go past my, well, not necessarily my death, but the kind of the narrator of the album, not the narrator, but the epic joyous part of the album is the post-death section for sure.
Wow, yeah. What does it sound like as the land subsumes and absorbs Alex?
Well, obviously I couldn't record the MIDI data for that, but I did record the MIDI data that was appropriate to that moment when things are rotting and going back into the soil, and
Mm,
it, and it, and it, and it produced. I mean, obviously Annie's doing like crazy, beautiful viola playing and everything, but yeah, no, it's basically finished. It's a good. I'm really proud of it as a piece of work,
mm.
and that's definitely the most joyous part of the album for sure.
Yeah. Well, maybe this is something you could leave in your will. Directions on how to. But listen, we've spoken about this aspect as well briefly before now, but because you were making me, as you were speaking just a moment ago, you were making me think about the previous In Convivium episode with artist Evgenia Emitz, and we were featuring um, old growth plants and old growth ecosystems as well, particularly forest. And we noted that there's a very different character. Um, Characters kind of become manifest as we age, as plants age, as a forest ages. And there are states of being, as Stephen Buhner points out, that come into play, that can only come into play with old age, and so I think your point about, harking back the halcyon days of our 20s or whatever, I think it's Bill Plotkin, the American uh, I don't know how to describe him, amazing ecotherapist, psychonaut perhaps, speaks about every stage of life having its own value and each being better than the one that went before because they all prepare the way for, and it's a lovely way to look at life so that, and I remember when I was studying landscape architecture, the most eminent landscape architect back in the 90s was someone called Sir Geoffrey Jellicoe, who was, I think, then perhaps in his 80s or 90s and doing his best work. And I remember thinking, wow, I'd like to follow that lead, And so, yeah, and who knows what lies in wait for any of us, obviously. Um,
Yeah, sure. Well,
because
the last 10 years I've had on the planet have been the best 10 I've had so far.
well done, well done.
100% true.
And that's despite, or perhaps even because of, the significant challenges everyone's faced in the last 8 or 9 years,
Yeah,
globally.
yeah, yeah, I think so. I think
Mm,
that's, like I think I said to you before. I think kind of being broken is probably necessary. I think you need that at certain points in your life to give you the humility and the openness, like when we're near to death or when we experience the death of a relative. All of those things, that's for me. That's always a time when you feel most connected to the universe. Perhaps it just opens up a side of your character that just means you're ready to embrace things again. I'm not really sure, but it definitely is true.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there's another thing I wanted to throw in and say we've briefly spoken about this. Well, I don't even know whether it's feasible, but obviously with my interests with plantae non gratae, those unwelcome plants, the weeds and invasives in our
Oh yeah, but they're the
gardens,
amazing
parks, and
ones.
landscapes. Well, exactly. Then I wonder whether there's any value, any gold to be found in working with the electronic data from, let's say, an industrial site or a polluted site with all the amazing healing plants that will be kind of influxing that kind of a context and scenario compared to, say, a piece of ancient woodland or even an old growth forest. That would be really interesting, don't you think?
I find that when I've done like Italian ryegrass dairy pastures that have basically been kicked from here to next week and back again from a soil health point of view, that it can sometimes be quite sparse, the data, and there doesn't seem to be anything like as much going on. And when you go into environments where nature's basically been left alone to run the show, you seem to get much more data. Um, but whether I haven't done enough because because I get excited, so I go into like nice places, and I haven't done. I did one about 4 years ago. I did a recovering factory, so I went into this kind of abandoned factory that was full of concrete and everything, but you had plants kind of like pushing up through cracked concrete and everything, and that was quite interesting. Um, but I wouldn't say that I have noticed absolute cast iron data where I can say it would just it's just usually less of it,
Mm, mm, mm.
just because life isn't perhaps as active.
Well,
I mean, I should do more. I just haven't had time to. I haven't had time to do enough because obviously the other thing about this conversation is that often you can collect some patterns fairly quickly and go and use them, and that's all cool. But sometimes the interesting things, you have to leave it recording for 24 hours. And then you get the 24 hours worth of data, which is obviously insane. But then you can look at it and then and I can now think, okay, so I can see even if there's millions of no, or not millions, well, probably it'll be a lot. Um, you can kind of see little waves and kind of little patterns in, and then you can go in and kind of like extract a bit and do some work on it.
mm. I mean, it makes sense. They say that the older the ecosystem, the more complex it is in terms of its, participants. So it makes sense that you'll get more data. But I wonder whether, do you think there'll come a time in the future at some point when just as they, we're just starting to kind of tease out the language of plants in terms of the chemical language. They believe that a compound called methyl jasmonate, I think it is that means I'm not well, and is common to, more than one particular species of plant, for example. And
Oh, I
it,
wonder if
it,
that's what would then give rise to those interesting patterns that I had. Then I wonder whether it's kicking out
well, I wonder if there's a relationship between and it's heavily nuanced and it's combinations of chemicals, just like, human word language. There's combinations of chemicals that arranged differently mean different things.
yeah,
And,
yeah,
I don't think we're even close. And maybe it's
no.
a good thing that we're not close to finding a Rosetta Stone. But do you think there's a relationship between the chemical language and the electronic language?
Oh, there must be. There,
Yeah.
there absolutely must be, because that must be how it works. It can't, because originally when you first do this, you assume that it's just a random scatter pattern of electrical impulses, um, and they don't really mean anything. But then when you watch them change in different environments and in different situations, whether that's a man meditating with the tree, or a man or a woman putting her hand on the tree, or somebody chopping the tree down or driving past with a car, when you see that those things seem to give you different patterns, then it must, well, not must, but the logical uh, pathway that I would follow is that the chemicals are then changing the electrical activity because they're changing the resistance in the system, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
So that would make sense for sure.
Well, there's some research work for
Yeah, that's
some.
a doctorate right there.
Oh, and a few, yes, absolutely. Okay, so what for those who might be, I mean, you're based in North Devon here in England, as I am, and you mentioned, possibilities of touring. For those people who might be in a position to see you live, what have you got coming up in the near future?
Well, I can't tell you that because we haven't quite decided what we're going to do. We're going to do some events here in July, and then because George is coming over from France to play, and then when we've done that, and if we enjoy doing that, because we work at a fairly glacial pace because we're not really we really value and really love what we're doing together. So we want to make sure that what we're doing is with the right people and we're doing it the right way rather than rushing into things and then breaking this thing that we really love. This sounds ridiculous, but it's true. Um, so when we've done these local performances that we're going to do in July, and we're gonna try, if the weather's really good enough, we're gonna try and do one um, where I live, and we're gonna try and do it in a woodland, which would be amazing. But obviously, the British weather may not allow us to do that, and if it doesn't allow us to do that, then we'll probably do it really close to a piece of woodland so as I can collect the data from the trees while we're performing rather than just from a plant pot on stage. So we'll probably do that um probably the second or the third week in July. I'm being a bit vague. I know this is
That's all
this is
right. Well,
not this is not what one would call promotion.
no, that's all right. You're as good as I am at that. But that's okay. It's organic growth, isn't it? But okay, so cue the
Yeah.
next question. Where can people go to find out as and when the that information is ready, but also to find out more about you, your work, your other offerings, and how they can maybe contact you?
Well, Rowena, who is an amazing woman and is basically wonderful at organizing my chaotic life, has made a website called composerinthewoods.com. And if you go to composerinthewoods.com, you will find links to Bandcamp, Spotify, Instagram, uh, and so on.
All of that kind of thing. Well done. Yeah, Rowena's great, isn't she?
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
Alex, we're at 45 now. I know you've had a full-on day, so we won't stretch our envelope. But are there any kind of final words you'd like to say about your work, the plants and the fungi, where you want to, where we're all going, perhaps not just yourself and Annie, say into the near future?
Hmm. I think the greatest act of revolution you can do as a human being, as a revolution, as in a pushback to the kind of bizarre behavior perhaps half the planet is manifesting at the moment, is a very simple thing. But I think that kindness is honestly the greatest revolution that's possible. I think if you can be kind, even if it's just to a family member, but even better, if you're kinder to somebody that you kind of slightly dislike or you're really annoyed by, I think kindness is really the golden ticket, and we should all embrace that because that's and that's hopefully what my artwork is making people think about. But I do think that is extremely important. I think that we'll probably look back in 100 years on how we started to use the internet with complete and absolute amazement. You know, if you look at when electricity was when it started to be used in domestic situations, possibly about 100 years ago, but I'm not entirely sure about that, but roughly. And we were plugging irons into light sockets and doing all these crazy wild things, and people were burning down their houses. They were electrocuting each other. I mean, even when I was at school, people it was still fairly common for people to get electrified. I remember when I was at school, and a friend of mine wanted to prove how electricity worked. So he got a hot water bottle and he got a pair of nail scissors and he broke the nail scissors in half and he got the neutral wire on this record player. He got this neutral wire and the live wire and he went around one round one handle of the scissors, one round the other handle of the scissors. Then he stood on the hot water bowl and stuck them in the socket to prove while holding on to them to prove to us A that rubber was an insulator and that B that the record player would go around and like there was like 4 10-year-olds sat around in awe of the older cool 14-year-old, but we all could have died when we were doing this. But if the boy had tried that in the 21st century, it would have tripped out the trip switch. And even if we'd all grabbed hold of him, we wouldn't have died. So we've learned how to make electricity much safer in the last 100 years than when we started. So I'm rambling on, but what I'm saying is I think we will probably look back on how we use the internet as the wild early days, and we'll probably learn that you've got to be really kind when you're using such a powerful tool because when you go on Facebook or whatever it happens to be, and you just drop in a slightly acidic sort of like bit of what you would consider to be jolly banter, that's a huge thing. You're not doing jolly banter to one person that you've just met at a train station. You're literally throwing out this big beast that's going to go marching off into the universe. You can't. You just don't need. It's not a good idea to do that. So I think perhaps if we can learn how to just use everything, but in particular social media, with a little bit more care and a bit more kindness, I think we might be really onto something.
And especially also with plants. I've got an idea came to mind. Maybe the plants sent it through, but yeah, at your next gig, maybe you could have a t-shirt made up with like plant kind.
Yes, plant kind. Yes,
There
I
we
like
go.
that. That's
And
good. I like that.
it'll cover it all. Alex,
Stop
brilliant.
the fungicide.
Yeah. Thank you ever so much for appearing on In Convivium. That was great, and
My goodness, you're so kind to have asked me. It's really fun.
yeah, hopefully we'll generate a little bit more interest for
Oh, well,
us
yeah,
and the
yeah,
plants and all of the above. And
yeah,
yeah, we'll see each other in person, I'm sure, before too long.
yeah,
And yes, I hope you have a gentle wind down from your full-on day.
yeah. Thanks, mate. Take care.
All right, and you.
Bye.
Bye bye.